They say the best revenge is living well. But that's what people without imagination tell themselves so they can fall asleep at night. The truth is the best revenge is letting someone's own greed pull the trigger for you. Welcome back to Revenge Addict. Grab your snacks, get comfortable because the people in these stories had every chance to behave themselves. They just chose wrong. And before we dive in, do me a quick favor. Hit that like button and subscribe. It costs you nothing and means everything to this channel. Thank you. My name is Leo. I was 34 years old when I learned that patience is just anger that learned how to read the fine print. I lived in Portland, Oregon, a city that smells like rain and roasted coffee beans and the quiet desperation of people who peaked in high school. I worked as a senior financial analyst for Sterling Realty Group, a mid-sized commercial real estate firm that bought up dying strip malls and turned them into slightly less dying strip malls. My job was to run numbers, spot inefficiencies, and make rich people richer. I was good at it, not because I was a genius, because I was the kind of person who read every single line of every single contract before I signed it. That habit saved my life, or at least my retirement fund. The antagonist in this story is a man named Arthur Sterling. He was the CEO, the founder, the face of the company. He was also my father-in-law. Imagine a golden retriever that somehow learned to talk and then used that power to become a corporate shark. That was Arthur. Big smile, big handshake, big promises. He had that specific kind of confidence that only comes from never having been truly broke a day in his life. Arthur loved three things: money, control, and the sound of his own voice giving a toast. He also loved telling me that I was lucky to be married to his daughter. He said it at every family dinner, every holiday, every time I asked for a raise. "Lee," he would say, clapping me on the shoulder hard enough to leave a bruise, "you're a smart guy, but smart doesn't matter, connections matter, and you married the right woman, so be grateful." And I was grateful. Elena, his daughter, was a veterinarian who smelled like antiseptic and kindness. She was the reason I put up with Arthur for 11 years. 11 years of being the last one promoted. 11 years of watching less qualified people get corner offices while I sat in a cubicle that faced a wall. 11 years of Arthur calling me son the way you call a stray dog buddy right before you shoo it away. But here's the thing about people like Arthur. They never just insult you. They steal from you too. The flashback happened 6 years into my time at Sterling Realty. I had identified a piece of land on the outskirts of Beaverton that was zoned wrong but about to be rezoned correctly. The numbers were beautiful. I wrote a 40-page analysis. I stayed up until 3 in the morning for 2 weeks straight. I presented it to Arthur in a boardroom with a cherry wood table that cost more than my car. He listened. He nodded. He said, "Great work, Leo. I'll take it from here." 2 months later, the company bought the land. The rezoning went through. They sold it to a developer for 4 times what they paid. The profit was $8 million. The bonus went to a guy named Brad who had been with the company for 8 months and played golf with Arthur every Saturday. I got a $500 gift card to a steakhouse and a handwritten note that said, "Keep grinding." That was the moment I stopped hoping Arthur would ever treat me fairly. That was the moment I started paying very close attention to every document that crossed my desk. And that brings me to the vacation. The first vacation I had taken in 4 years. Elena had been begging me to take time off. She said I looked like a ghost. She said my left eye had been twitching for 3 months. She booked a little cabin on the Oregon coast, the kind of place with no cell service and a wood stove and a view of gray water hitting gray rocks. I told Arthur I was going to be unreachable for 1 week. 1 week. He laughed and said, "Don't worry, Leo. The company won't burn down without you." Then he added, "Probably." That was his idea of a joke. I left my laptop at home. I turned off notifications. I sat on a damp porch and watched the fog roll in and out like the ocean was breathing. For the first 3 days, I felt something I had almost forgotten existed: peace. On the 4th day, I drove into the nearest town to buy firewood and groceries. That's when my phone buzzed back to life. 17 missed calls, 8 text messages, all from Arthur's assistant, a woman named Carla who had the dead-eyed stare of someone who had seen too many HR violations. The last text said, "Call Arthur immediately, it's urgent." I did not call Arthur immediately. I bought my firewood. I bought coffee beans and eggs and a bottle of cheap whiskey. I ate a sandwich on a bench overlooking the Pacific Ocean. Then when I was good and ready, I called him. He answered on the first ring. "Leo," he said, not hello, not how's the coast, just my name like a hammer dropping. "We need to talk about your performance." I said nothing. That's a trick I learned. Silence makes people like Arthur panic. "I've been reviewing the quarterly numbers," he said. "Cost overruns on the Wilson project, missed deadlines on the Hawthorne renovation. I've got Brad's reports here, and frankly, they paint a concerning picture." Brad, of course, the golf buddy. the guy who once asked me how to calculate a net present value in a meeting where everyone pretended not to hear. "Arthur," I said, "I'm on vacation. Can this wait until Monday?" "No," he said. "It cannot. I've made a decision. Sterling Realty is going in a different direction. We're letting you go, effective immediately. Carla will send you the separation paperwork." I could hear him smiling. I could hear the satisfaction in his voice, the same satisfaction he probably felt when he closed a big deal or won a golf tournament against someone who let him win. He had been waiting for this. He had been looking for an excuse to fire me for years, and he chose to do it while I was on vacation, while I was 4 hours away, over the phone, like I was a telemarketer, like the 11 years I had given him meant nothing. Like the fact that I was married to his daughter was just a footnote he could ignore. "Okay," I said. "Okay, Arthur, I understand." He paused. He had expected me to argue. He had expected me to beg. He had probably rehearsed a speech about how he was sorry, but business was business and family was family, and sometimes the two didn't mix. But I didn't give him that. I just said okay, because here's what Arthur didn't know. 6 months earlier, I had found something, a loophole. Not in my employment contract. That was standard boilerplate. No, this was in the shareholder agreement. You see, 5 years ago, Arthur had given me a small equity stake in the company, 1%. It was a token gesture, a way to keep me loyal without actually paying me what I was worth. I had read that shareholder agreement so many times I had memorized it. And buried on page 47 in a section titled Involuntary Termination of Key Employees, there was a clause. It said that if a shareholder who was also an employee was terminated without cause, they had the right to trigger a put option that forced the company to buy back their shares at 10 times the fair market value. 10 times. But that wasn't the good part. The good part was a single sentence at the bottom of the page. It said, and I quote, "For the purposes of this agreement, cause shall be defined exclusively as a felony conviction directly related to the employee's duties. No other event or performance metric shall constitute cause." I read that sentence 15 times the first night I found it. I checked the date on the agreement. I checked the signatures. I checked to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. Arthur's lawyer, a tired man named Gerald who had been practicing law since the Carter administration, had copy-pasted that clause from an old template and never updated it. In the world of corporate law, cause usually meant things like theft, fraud, insubordination. But Gerald had accidentally defined it so narrowly that basically nothing counted as cause except a felony. Poor performance, not cause. Missing deadlines, not cause. Taking a vacation and not answering your phone, definitely not cause. Arthur had just fired me without cause, which meant I could trigger the put option. Which meant Sterling Realty had to buy my 1% stake at 10 times its fair market value. The company was worth about $40 million. 1% was $400,000. 10 times that was $4 million. Arthur didn't know. He had no idea, because Arthur never read anything. He had people for that. He had lawyers and assistants and a son-in-law who did his dirty work. He was the kind of man who signed documents without looking at them because he assumed the world existed to serve him. So when he fired me over the phone on my first vacation in 4 years, I didn't get angry. I got patient. I drove back to the cabin. I told Alina what happened. She cried, not because I lost my job, because she knew her father better than anyone. "He's been wanting to do this for years," she said. "He never thought you were good enough for me, for the company." I held her. I told her everything would be fine. I did not tell her about the clause, not yet. I wanted to see how bad Arthur would be first. I wanted to see if he would try to screw me on the separation package. I wanted to see if he would offer me the bare minimum and expect me to thank him for it, and he did not disappoint. Carla sent the separation paperwork the next day. The offer was 12 weeks of severance, no bonus, no health insurance extension, no mention of my shares. They wanted me to sign away my equity for nothing. Just a quick signature and a thank you for your service and a lifetime of being the guy who got fired by his father-in-law. I did not sign. Instead, I called a lawyer, not Gerald. Gerald worked for Arthur. I found a woman named Patricia Ng, a pit bull in a pantsuit who specialized in shareholder disputes. Her office was in a converted warehouse downtown. She had a bonsai tree on her desk and a framed photo of Ruth Bader Ginsburg flipping the bird. I liked her immediately. I showed her the shareholder agreement. I watched her read page 47. Her eyes got wide. Then she laughed, not a polite laugh, a laugh that said someone was about to lose a lot of money. "Leo," she said, "do you understand what you have here?" $4 million, I said. "Potentially," she said, "but only if you play this exactly right. Arthur is going to fight. He's going to claim you were fired for cause. He's going to invent performance issues. He's going to make your life miserable. You need to document everything, every email, every text, every time he looked at you funny in a meeting." I told her about the phone call, the vacation, the way Arthur had said effective immediately like he was a king banishing a court jester. Perfect, she said. Oregon is a one-party consent state for recording. Did you record the call? I shook my head. Then we'll have to work with what we have. But here's the thing. The burden of proof is on Arthur. He has to prove you committed a felony. He can't because you didn't. So we trigger the put option. We send a formal notice, and then we wait for him to panic. I sent the notice on a Tuesday, certified mail. Return receipt requested. I included a cover letter that was polite, professional, and absolutely devastating. It said in so many words that I was exercising my contractual rights and expected a check for $4 million within 30 days as stipulated by the agreement. I also CC'd every member of the board of directors. There were 7 of them. 3 were Arthur's golf buddies. 2 were investors who didn't care about anything except returns. 1 was a woman named Margaret who had started as a receptionist and now owned 12% of the company. And the 7th was Alina, my wife, Arthur's daughter. She held 2%. She had never exercised any real power. She just showed up to meetings, nodded politely, and went back to saving animals. But her vote mattered, and Arthur knew it. The explosion came 48 hours later. Arthur showed up at my apartment, not the cabin. The apartment Alina and I shared in the city, a modest 2-bedroom with a leaky faucet and a balcony that faced an alley. He didn't knock. He had a key. Because he was my father-in-law and boundaries were for poor people, he walked in while I was making coffee. Alina was at work. It was just me and Arthur and the sound of the espresso machine hissing. "What the hell is this?" he said, waving the notice in my face. His hands were shaking. His smile was gone. In its place was something raw and ugly. "It's a legal document," I said. "You should read it. I know that's not your strong suit, but there's a first time for everything." He threw the papers on the counter. "You think you're clever? You think you can blackmail me?" "I'm not blackmailing anyone," I said. "I'm exercising a contractual right. You fired me without cause. The agreement says I get 10 times my share value. It's very straightforward." "You were fired for cause," he shouted. "Poor performance, missed deadlines. You cost this company money." "The agreement defines cause as a felony conviction. Did I commit a felony, Arthur?" He opened his mouth, closed it. Opened it again. "That's a technicality, a typo. No court would enforce that." "Gerald wrote it," I said. "Gerald signed it, you signed it. All 7 board members signed it, including Alina. So unless you want to argue in front of a judge that your own lawyer is incompetent and your own signature is meaningless, I suggest you start writing a check." Arthur stared at me. For a moment, I saw something behind his eyes, fear, real fear, because $4 million wasn't just money. It was cash flow. It was liquidity. Sterling Realty didn't have $4 million sitting in a bank account. They had assets, they had properties, they had debt. A sudden $4 million obligation could trigger loan covenants. It could force asset sales. It could, in a worst-case scenario, bankrupt the company. Arthur had built his whole life on the assumption that he was untouchable, and I had just touched him. "Your family," he said finally. His voice was quieter now, almost pleading. "You're married to my daughter. You can't do this to family." I poured my coffee. I took a sip. I looked him right in the eye. "You fired me on vacation over the phone, Arthur. You didn't care about family then." He left without another word. The door slammed hard enough to crack the frame. I finished my coffee, then I called Patricia. "He's going to fight," I said. "Good," she said. "Let him." The next 3 weeks were a masterclass in watching a man destroy himself. Arthur tried everything. He hired a new lawyer, a shark named Bennett, who charged $1,200 an hour and wore shoes that cost more than my first car. Bennett sent threatening letters. He called the put option frivolous and bad faith and a textbook example of unjust enrichment. Patricia responded to each letter with a single sentence. "The contract is the contract." Arthur tried to pressure Alina. He called her at work. He left voicemails about loyalty and blood and how she needed to talk some sense into her husband. Alina listened to each voicemail, saved them, and forwarded them to Patricia. She told me later that her father had always been like this, charming when he got what he wanted, cruel when he didn't. She had spent her whole childhood watching him destroy people who crossed him. She had never seen anyone fight back, until now. Arthur tried to turn the board against me. He called an emergency meeting. He presented fabricated performance reviews. He claimed I had intentionally sabotaged the Wilson project to make him look bad. Margaret, the former receptionist, asked to see the evidence. Arthur stammered. He had none. The meeting ended with a vote, 5-2 in favor of honoring the put option. The 2 no votes were Arthur's golf buddies. The yes votes included Margaret, the 2 investors who smelled liability, and Alina, my wife. Her father in the eye and said, "Dad, you should have read the contract." That was the moment Arthur cracked. I know because I was listening. Alina had put me on speakerphone, not to be sneaky, because she wanted me to hear her father break. There was a long silence after her words. Then Arthur said, "I built this company, I gave you everything, and this is how you repay me." "You gave me nothing," Alina said. "You gave Leo nothing. You took from us for 11 years and called it generosity." This isn't revenge, Dad. This is just math. The call ended. Arthur stopped fighting after that, not because he accepted defeat, because he realized he had no options left. He couldn't afford to pay me. He couldn't afford to fight me in court. He couldn't even afford to delay because the shareholder agreement had a penalty clause for late payments. Every day past 30 days, the amount increased by 1%. So he did the only thing he could do. He called me, not at the apartment. At the cabin, because he knew I was back there, hiding from the world, waiting for the storm to pass. "Leo," he said, his voice was flat, defeated. "I want to make a deal. I'm listening. I'll give you 2 million cash in 30 days. You walk away from the rest. We never speak of this again." "No, 3 million final offer. The contract says 4 plus interest. You're at day 23, Arthur. In 7 days, it becomes 4.4 million. "You're going to destroy me," he said. "You're going to destroy the company. Do you understand that? There are 73 employees, families, mortgages. You're going to put people out of work because you're angry about a phone call." That was his final move, the guilt card. The idea that I was the villain for holding him to an agreement he signed. It was almost beautiful in its hypocrisy. "Arthur," I said, "you could have paid me fairly for 11 years. You could have given me a bonus for the Beaverton land deal. You could have promoted me instead of Brad. You could have treated me like a son instead of a servant. You had every chance to behave yourself. You just chose wrong." I hung up. He didn't call back. The 30-day deadline came and went. Arthur did not pay. On day 31, Patricia filed a demand for arbitration. On day 32, Sterling Realty's bank called in a loan covenant violation. On day 33, two of the company's largest investors announced they were exercising their own put options, because if Arthur was going to ignore contracts for me, he might ignore them for anyone. On day 34, Arthur Sterling had a heart attack. Not a bad one. The kind where you clutch your chest and someone drives you to the emergency room and you spend the night hooked up to monitors while a cardiologist tells you to stop eating red meat and start taking statins. Alina went to see him in the hospital. She asked if I wanted to come. I said no. That wasn't cruelty. That was self-preservation. Some people don't deserve your forgiveness just because they almost died. He didn't die. He was discharged 3 days later. And on day 41, the arbitration began. It lasted 6 hours. Patricia presented the shareholder agreement. She presented the phone records showing Arthur had fired me on my vacation. She presented the separation offer that mentioned nothing about cause. She presented Arthur's own emails, which he had stupidly kept, where he bragged to Brad about finally getting rid of the dead weight. Bennett, Arthur's lawyer, tried to argue that the felony-only definition of cause was a scrivener's error. The arbitrator, a retired judge named O'Brien who had zero patience for rich people playing dumb, asked Bennett one question. "Did your client sign the agreement?" "Yes, but did his lawyer draft the agreement?" "Yes, but then it's not a scrivener's error. It's a contract. Award for the claimant. $4 million plus 1% interest per day for 11 days late. Total amount, $4,440,000, payable within 14 days. Arthur's face when the arbitrator said those words. I wish I could describe it in a way that does it justice. It was the face of a man who had just realized that every door he thought was locked was actually made of paper. He didn't scream. He didn't cry. He just sat there very still like a statue of himself. Then he looked at me, and I looked at him, and I said quietly so only he could hear, "Keep grinding, Arthur." Because that's what he had written on my steakhouse gift card 6 years ago. That was the final line. He heard it. His left eye twitched. And then he stood up, shook the arbitrator's hand, and walked out of the room without saying another word to me. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Sterling Realty didn't have $4.4 million. They had to sell 3 properties at a discount to raise the cash. The fire sale alerted the market that something was wrong. Other creditors got nervous. Lines of credit got frozen. Within 60 days, the company was forced into a restructuring. Arthur lost his CEO title. The board brought in an outside manager. Margaret became chairwoman, and Brad, the golf buddy, was laid off in the first round of cuts. I heard he moved to Arizona and started selling timeshares. I don't feel bad about that. Brad knew what he was. He just thought he was protected. As for me, I took the money. After taxes and Patricia's fees, I had just under $3 million. Alina and I bought a small farm outside of Portland, 20 acres, a pond. Barn that we converted into an animal rescue. She quit her job at the corporate veterinary clinic and started her own practice. She works with abandoned dogs and injured owls and once a very confused alpaca. She is happier than I have ever seen her. I manage the finances. I run the numbers. I make sure the rescue never goes under. I also consult part-time for a nonprofit that helps employees understand their contract rights. I don't charge much. I don't need to. And here's the thing about having enough. It changes you. When you're grinding every day, fighting for scraps, you become sharp and hard and hungry. But when you have enough, you can afford to be soft. You can afford to be patient. You can afford to help other people who are still in the fight. I think about Arthur sometimes. He lives in a smaller house now, a rental. His wife, Alina's mother, left him 6 months after the arbitration. She told a friend that she couldn't look at him without seeing a man who had thrown away everything because he couldn't admit he was wrong. Arthur calls Alina every Sunday. She lets it go to voicemail. She saves the messages, not for evidence, for something else. Something I don't have a word for. Memory, maybe, or closure. The last time I saw him was at a grocery store. He was buying frozen dinners and a six-pack of cheap beer. He looked smaller, not thinner or older, just smaller. Like something inside him had deflated. He saw me, I saw him. He opened his mouth. I shook my head, not in anger, in acknowledgement. We had nothing left to say to each other. He walked away. I bought my eggs and my coffee and my cheap whiskey. And then I went home to my wife and my pond and my very confused alpaca. Here's the final twist. And I saved this for last because it changes everything you just heard. Remember how I said I found that clause by reading every line of every contract? That was true, but what I didn't tell you is that Alina was the one who gave me the shareholder agreement in the first place. She had kept a copy in her nightstand for years. She had highlighted the clause on page 47. She had circled it in pink highlighter. She had been waiting for me to find it. Or rather, she had been waiting for her father to fire me. Because Alina knew Arthur better than anyone. She knew he would eventually get tired of me. She knew he would eventually do something stupid. She knew he would eventually give me the leverage I needed. She just didn't tell me, because she wanted to see if I would figure it out on my own, if I was worthy of the trap she had laid. And I was. The night after the arbitration, she poured me a glass of that cheap whiskey. She sat me down on the porch, and she said, "I highlighted that clause 3 years ago, Leo. 3 years. I was just waiting for him to hang himself." I asked her why she didn't just tell me. She smiled. It was a sad smile. The kind of smile that knows too much. "Because if I told you," she said, "you would have quit, you would have walked away, you would have been the bigger person, and I didn't want you to be the bigger person. I wanted you to be the person who fights back." So there it is, the woman I married, the daughter of my enemy, the quietest revenge of all. They say the best revenge is living well, and maybe that's true. But living well is a lot easier when you have $3 million and a wife who loves you enough to set the trap while pretending to hold the ladder. The people in these stories had every chance to behave themselves. They just chose wrong. If you enjoyed this story, you're officially a revenge addict. And before I leave you, do me a quick favor. Hit that like button and subscribe. It costs you nothing and means everything to this channel. Thank you.